Cowboy found her stealing eggs, then asked, "You want to work, or wear white beside me forever?" A harsh wind swept through the prairie that morning, rattling the loose boards of the old ranch house and carrying the scent of dust and hay across the land. The sun had just started to rise, painting the horizon in muted gold, when a cowboy named Silas caught sight of movement near the chicken coop. He was a man used to the silence of dawn, a man whose life had been carved out by cattle drives, endless fences, and lonely nights under the stars. But this morning, silence betrayed him, because the faint rustle of feathers and the nervous clucking of hens told him someone was trespassing. Silas rested his palm against the butt of his revolver, not in anger but in instinct. Out here, theft could cost a man dearly. He stepped lightly, his boots crunching over dry soil, until he saw her, a young woman crouched low, gathering eggs into the folds of her skirt. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn at the hem, and her face bore the weariness of too many hungry nights. She startled when she saw him, her wide eyes fixing on his tall frame and weather-worn hat. "Put those back," Silas said, his voice calm but edged with the authority of a man who'd seen too much wrong in his time. She hesitated, clutching the fragile shells to her chest like they were more precious than gold. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I ain't here to make trouble. I needed something to eat." Silas studied her, the way her shoulders trembled, the hollowness in her cheeks. She was no bandit, no outlaw, just someone desperate. The land had been cruel this season, drought drying the fields, ranchers locking up supplies, and townsfolk less kind than they once were. He lowered his hand away from the gun, not wanting fear to drive her further. "What's your name?" he asked. "Evelyn," she said, her eyes darting between him and the coop as though measuring her chances of running. "You got a place nearby?" She shook her head slowly. "Nowhere that wants me." Something inside Silas shifted at that answer. He could have sent her away. He could have taken the eggs back and left her with nothing. But his heart wasn't made of stone. He thought of the long nights he'd sat alone in the ranch house, the empty table, the quiet that pressed in too heavily. He thought of how the world could break a person who had no hand reaching out to steady them. And so he asked the question that surprised even himself. "You want to work?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Work? Plenty to be done around here," Silas said. "Chores, cooking, keeping things in order. You'll eat proper if you pull your weight." Her lips parted, as though she wanted to accept immediately, but pride stopped her. "And if I don't?" Silas's mouth curved in a faint smile, dry as the land around them. "Then maybe you'd rather wear white beside me forever." The words hung between them, startling, raw. Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't know whether he was teasing her, testing her, or speaking some buried truth. A blush rose against her dirt-smudged skin, and she looked down at the eggs still clutched in her hands. "I don't know you," she said softly. "And I don't know you," Silas replied. "But I know hunger when I see it. I know loneliness too. Sometimes that's enough for two people to start with." Evelyn stood there for a long moment, the morning sun warming her face, the decision pressing heavy on her shoulders. Life had never offered her choices before, only survival. And now here was this man, steady as the earth beneath their feet, offering her something more than just food. She swallowed hard, then lowered the eggs back into the coop, one by one, her hands trembling. "All right," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll work." Silas tipped his hat, a shadow of relief crossing his features. "Good. Breakfast's better when there's two at the table." And with that, he turned toward the ranch house, his stride slow enough for her to follow. Evelyn hesitated only once more, glancing back at the wide, empty land stretching beyond the co-op. Then she clutched her torn skirt and walked after him, the sound of her steps weaving a fragile thread of hope into the silence of the prairie. The prairie stretched wide and endless, its silence broken only by the low sigh of wind through brittle grass and the distant cluck of hens. Silas Ward had lived most of his life in that silence, his days carved from work and solitude, his nights lit only by the stars. He was a man of the land, toughened by storms, hardened by cattle drives, but softened in ways he rarely admitted, the kind of man whose heart still carried the echo of old grief. That morning, with the sun dragging itself up in a wash of pale fire, Silas had caught sight of her, a girl bent low among his hens, her dress torn and her hands desperate. She had looked up at him like a cornered deer, wide-eyed and trembling, clutching eggs to her chest as though they were her last salvation. Her name, she told him, was Evelyn. When he had offered her the chance to work, he had half expected her to spit in his face, to run into the open plains and vanish like a ghost. But she hadn't. She had stayed. She had looked at him with the wary eyes of someone who had known little kindness and less mercy. And when he added the words, those bold, reckless words, she had stood frozen, stunned by the weight of them. Or wear white beside me forever. Evelyn had chosen to work. She had stepped into the ranch house behind him, her footsteps hesitant, her gaze darting like a bird trapped between fear and hope. Silas had opened the door wide, letting her see the emptiness inside. A wide table with only one chair drawn close, a hearth cold with ashes, dishes stacked neatly but unused, every surface clean yet barren. The house was built for more than one life, but it had sheltered only him for years. You can start with the stove, Silas said, his voice rough but not unkind. Firewood stacked by the porch. I'll see to the horses. Evelyn nodded, though the words caught in her throat. She moved to the hearth, crouching before it, her fingers fumbling with the kindling. The warmth of fire had always been a stranger to her, something borrowed from others, never her own. She built the flame slowly, coaxing it to life until it snapped and crackled. The sound filled the room with something that felt almost like belonging. Silas returned after tending to the horses, dust clinging to his boots. He paused at the sight of her, kneeling by the fire as though she had always been there. Something tightened in his chest. She was thin, worn by hunger, yet her back was straight, her movements steady. Not fragile, not broken, only starved of a chance. You know how to cook? He asked. She glanced at him, her eyes sharp despite the weariness. If you've got something worth cooking. He chuckled low, surprised by the edge in her tone. Bacon and beans. Nothing fancy. Food's food, she murmured. She cooked as though every bite mattered, careful with the pan, turning the strips of meat until the scent filled the kitchen, rich and tempting. Silas sat at the table, watching her in silence, his mind drifting back to when another woman had stood in that kitchen, years ago. His late wife, Clara. She had been gentle, patient, a light that warmed even the darkest of nights. But she had been gone too long now, taken by fever in the cruel winter, leaving behind nothing but memories and a man who had grown too accustomed to loneliness. Evelyn turned, placing a plate before him. Her hands trembled faintly as she set down her own share. They ate without speaking, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the low hiss of the fire. But in the quiet, something began to shift, a thread weaving between them, fragile but strong enough to hold. After breakfast, Silas led her outside. You'll earn your keep here, he said. Not with stealing, with work. She met his gaze, unflinching. All work. I ain't afraid of it. True to her word, she worked. The days stretched into weeks, and Evelyn took to every chore as though it was her lifeline. She mended torn shirts, scrubbed floors until they shone, and learned the rhythm of ranch life. She fetched water, tended the chickens, and kept the stove burning. Her hands grew calloused, her skin sun-browned, but her eyes, once hollow with hunger, began to hold a faint light. Silas watched her from a distance, never pressing, never asking questions she didn't want to answer. He knew she carried secrets, shadows that haunted her in the stillness of night. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't near, she would step onto the porch and stare out at the land as though searching for something, or someone, she had lost. Her shoulders would stiffen, her breath catch, but she never spoke of it. One evening, after the sun had dipped low and painted the sky in scarlet, Silas found her by the barn, her hands stroking the mane of his old horse, Ranger. The animal leaned into her touch, trusting her as though he'd known her for years. You've got away with him, Silas said. She startled, turning sharply, but relaxed when she saw it was him. Animals don't judge, she said quietly. They just know who you are. And who are you, Evelyn? He asked. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, the setting sun blazing behind her. Someone who don't want to be hungry no more. Her answer was simple, but Silas knew there was more. He didn't push. Instead, he nodded slowly. Then you'll never be hungry here. Her lips parted, a breath of something like gratitude escaping before she caught it. For a moment, her guard slipped, and Silas saw the girl beneath the scars, the one who still believed, despite everything, that kindness was possible. That night, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows across the walls. Evelyn sat near it, mending a shirt of Silas's, her fingers deft with the needle. Silas watched her from his chair, the lamplight softening her features. He thought of the words he had spoken the day they met, reckless words about wearing white beside him forever. At the time, he had spoken half in jest, half in instinct. But now, watching her there, stitching threads into fabric as though stitching herself into his life, he wondered if the words had been truer than he realized. The days rolled on, each one binding them closer. Evelyn laughed more easily, though the sound was rare and fleeting. Silas found himself drawn to it, the way a man in the desert longs for water. He caught himself waiting for those moments, doing small things to coax them out, fixing the porch swing so she could sit in the evenings, carving a small wooden comb for her hair. She accepted each gesture with quiet wonder, as though no one had ever thought of her before. But shadows still lingered. One afternoon, a rider came through, Tom Briggs, a ranch hand from the neighboring spread. He stopped at the fence, tipping his hat to Silas, his eyes flicking to Evelyn as she carried a pail of water. "Didn't know you took on help, Ward," Tom said, his tone curious but edged. "Didn't know it was your business," Silas replied evenly. Tom smirked. "Careful who you let in. Strays got a way of bringing trouble with them." Evelyn stiffened, her knuckles white around the handle of the pail. Silas stepped closer, his stance protective. "She's no stray. She's under my roof, and that's all you need to know." Tom shrugged, but his eyes lingered on Evelyn too long before he rode off. She turned away, her shoulders tight, her breath unsteady. "You know him?" Silas asked quietly. She shook her head, too quickly. "No, just tired is all." Silas didn't press, but the unease in her eyes told him enough. Whatever past she carried, it was drawing nearer. That night, long after the fire had burned low, Evelyn lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. Silas sat by the hearth, the weight of her silence heavy in his chest. He wanted to ask her to trust him, to tell him the truth of where she'd come from, but he knew trust wasn't something taken. It was given, and he would wait for hers, no matter how long it took. The prairie outside stretched silent, vast, and waiting. And somewhere in the darkness, a storm was gathering, one that would test them both, and the fragile thread they had begun to weave together. The storm broke 3 nights later. Not the kind that split the sky with lightning, but the kind that came in the form of men, hard-eyed and reckless, riding with dust at their heels. Evelyn was the first to sense it. She had lived long enough on the run to know the sound of riders coming not with neighborly visits but with intent carved sharp as a knife. Silas was mending a saddle when she rushed into the barn, her face pale. "They're coming," she whispered, breath short. "I can feel it." He rose, his hand steady on the leather, though his jaw tightened. "Who?" Her eyes flickered, shadows spilling over them. "The men I left behind." That was all she said, but it was enough. Silas didn't ask how many or why. The truth lived in the tremble of her hands. He stepped closer, his voice low and calm, the way a man steadies a spooked horse. "You're safe here." But Evelyn shook her head. "You don't know what they're like. They won't stop till they have me." Silas reached, gripping her shoulders with a firmness that held more than strength. It carried a promise. "Then they'll have to go through me first." The riders came at dusk, their silhouettes black against the bleeding sky. 3 of them, rough men with eyes sharp as vultures, dismounting at the edge of the ranch. The tallest stepped forward, his boots grinding against the dirt, his voice carrying like a curse. Evelyn. Her name ripped through the quiet, heavy with claim. She stood frozen on the porch, the firelight behind her casting her shadow long. Silas moved to her side, his presence like a wall, his gaze unflinching. "You got the wrong place," he called back. The tall man spat into the dust. "Don't play the fool, Ward. She's ours." She ran, but she don't get to run far. Silas's hand hovered near his holster, his body calm but coiled. "She's no one's but her own. And she's under my roof now." The man's laughter was cruel, echoing across the still land. "Under your roof. She's nothing but a thief. She took from us, and we mean to take her back. Step aside, or regret it." Evelyn's breath hitched. shame flooding her cheeks. "Silas, please," she began, but he silenced her with a look. Not harsh, not accusing. Just steady. "Tell me plain," he said softly to her, his eyes never leaving the men. "Is it true?" Her voice cracked. "I took food. I took what I needed to live. But nothing more. I swear it." Silas nodded once. That was all he needed. He faced the riders again, his stance iron. "Then I reckon we're done here. She stays." The tall man's hand twitched toward his gun. The air thickened, the silence trembling like a wire stretched too tight. Evelyn's heart hammered as the weight of violence pressed closer. And then it broke. Steel flashing, guns drawn, the crack of shots splitting the dusk. Silas moved fast, faster than she had ever seen, his revolver barking fire. The first man fell hard into the dirt, his gun spinning from his hand. The second fired wild, grazing the porch post, splinters raining around Evelyn. Silas pivoted, steady as bedrock, his shot finding its mark. The man collapsed, cursing as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. The third rider froze, eyes wide, his nerve broken. He dropped his gun, backing toward his horse. "She ain't worth it," he muttered, scrambling into the saddle. Within seconds, he was gone, galloping into the night. Silas lowered his revolver slowly, his breath even, his gaze still locked on the horizon. Evelyn stood trembling, her body rigid with fear and awe. Two men groaned in the dirt, one silent in death. It was over. For now. Silas turned to her, his voice gentle despite the fire still in his veins. "You all right?" Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "You could have died, but I didn't." "You shouldn't have." He cut her off, his tone firm. "I told you, you're safe here. I meant it." Her knees buckled, and before she could fall, Silas caught her, his arms strong around her shaking frame. For the first time since she had come, she let herself lean into him, the walls she had built crumbling beneath the weight of his steadiness. Later, after the wounded men had been hauled to town and silence returned to the ranch, Evelyn sat by the hearth, her face pale in the glow. Silas brought her a cup of coffee, setting it gently in her hands. "They'll come again," she said, her voice hollow. "Then I'll be here again," he answered simply. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Why risk yourself for me? I ain't worth it." Silas crouched before her, his gaze unwavering. "Don't say that. You've worked hard, given more than you owed. You're worth more than you know." Her lip trembled. "All my life, I've been running. From hunger, from men who wanted to own me, from the world that never gave me a chance. And then you found me stealing your eggs, and instead of casting me out, you offered me a place." He reached, brushing a tear from her cheek with a calloused thumb. Sometimes a man knows when something, or someone, is meant to stay. The room thickened with silence, the fire snapping soft. Evelyn's breath caught as his hand lingered, not demanding, only offering. "Silas," she whispered, his name a fragile thread. He leaned closer, his voice low. "I meant what I said that first morning. About work, or wearing white." Her heart pounded, memory striking like lightning. She had thought it a jest, a half-dream in the midst of desperation. But now, staring into his steady eyes, she knew he had meant it all along. "I don't know how to be a wife," she admitted, her voice breaking. He smiled faintly, a warmth softening the rough edges of his face. "You know how to fight for your life. You know how to stand when the world tries to break you. That's more than enough." Tears blurred her vision. "And you'd have me, just as I am. Just as you are," he said firmly. The fire glowed, wrapping them in warmth as the night pressed close. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt the weight of fear ease from her chest, replaced by something new, something that burned steady and strong. In the days that followed, the ranch became more than a refuge. It became a home. Evelyn moved through the rooms no longer like a guest but like a woman claiming her place. She sang softly as she worked, her voice threading through the house like sunlight. Silas found himself listening for it, his heart lifting at every note. The townsfolk noticed too. When Silas brought her into town, heads turned, whispers rose. Some with judgment, some with curiosity. But he held his head high, her hand steady in his, as if daring anyone to question. Tom Briggs smirked when he saw them, but even his sharp tongue held no power against the quiet strength in Silas's stance, the newfound light in Evelyn's eyes. Weeks bled into months, the land greening with spring, the ranch pulsing with new life. Evelyn tended the hens with care, planted flowers by the porch, filled the rooms with small touches that softened the edges of solitude. Silas watched it all unfold, the emptiness of his house replaced with warmth, the echo of loneliness fading into laughter and shared silence. One morning, he led her out to the pasture, the sky blazing wide above them. In his hand was a small box, worn smooth from years of waiting. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple silver band, nothing fancy, but steady, unyielding, like him. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rough with feeling, "I ain't a man of many words. But I know this, I want you here beside me, not just for today, but for every day to come. Will you be my wife?" Her breath caught, tears filling her eyes, the weight of the past colliding with the hope of the future. She had been hunted, broken, starved. She had been a thief, a runaway, a shadow. But here, with him, she was seen. She was wanted. She was home. "Yes," she whispered, the word trembling but true. "Yes." Silas slid the band onto her finger, his hand steady though his heart thundered. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers, the prairie stretching endless around them, bearing witness to the vow that needed no preacher, no crowd. Just two souls, scarred but unbroken, choosing each other. And from that day on, Evelyn never ran again. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now. Watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in the way you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.